Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tom Quigley, bringing the latest tips, tricks and techniques for your contemporary painting and drawing needs. And we're back with another video. This one is Tutorial Tuesday, so it's where I bring you all the techniques and processes, how you can use a specific material. And this week it's going to be on watercolor. I get so many questions asked about watercolor. Some people are afraid of using it. Some people want to just build on their techniques and processes. So hopefully today I can give you all that's needed so you can improve your own work. So grab a tea or coffee. I'm going to set up here and then I can start getting on with the video. See you in a minute. So watercolor, what is it? Well, basically watercolor is pigment, like the color, combined with gum arabic, which acts as the binder. It's a bit like adding oil into pigment to create oil paint. It creates it like a glue and also helps it stick to the surface. Now, watercolor has been going for hundreds of years, and I can still see now why it's been such a popular material to use. Whether you just want to make some quick recordings out in the landscape, or maybe illustrations for books, but also it can be a standalone material to use and create some absolute masterpieces. One of them that sticks in my mind is J.W. Turner's. If you have a look at his skies, they're absolutely mesmerising, and the translucency that you get from watercolour, you cannot get it like any other material. But also bring it back to the contemporary day, have a look at Callum Innes' work. His work are a completely different setting, very abstract, but again, got that beautiful translucent, mesmerising quality. So what we're going to do today, first of all, is crack on with those 10 different techniques. And the materials that you'll need for that are watercolour. You can play around with just a couple of different ones if you want to. You can actually have the pan watercolours if you want to, which are in the little squares. Or you can actually have what I have, which is the tubes of watercolour. My specific ones that I'm having are the Winsor & Newton professional ones. You don't necessarily need these ones. I just wanted to use them within my own work, and you don't need a lot of them. So you only need a little bit if you're going to use it, because watercolour goes a relatively long way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to use a very simple rounded brush. The brushes that I'm using are actually very soft. So if you're going to be using watercolour, then please make sure you've got some bristles that are really soft. They're going to be the best type of brushes to use. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to set up the camera so you can see my piece of paper, and I'm going to start drawing out where I'm going to put those techniques in. So I've drawn out my boxes now. They're not all exactly the same size, but it's quite nice to just do them freehand within a sketchbook. It makes it look a little bit more handmade or organic, a little bit more artistic as well. So we're going to start off with the first one here, and this one, all we're going to do is use one colour and then transition it from dark to light. And the way we're going to do that is just using water. Okay, so I'm going to choose just one colour. I'm actually using one of these brushes. It's just a rounded brush, quite soft, and it's damp at the moment. So I'm just going to dip that into the water. Depending if you're using the pans or maybe the tubes that I've got, you might need a little bit more water, but you don't want to drench it, okay, because otherwise it's going to be uncontrollable. So you just want to coat the paintbrush back and forth, and then we're going to start just at the top there. Trying to keep in the lines as best you possibly can, and just make sure you don't go back over the surface too many times, because what a mistake is that you can start peeling up the paper, which sometimes isn't a nice when you're doing a watercolour painting. So I've got about halfway there at the moment. I can always add to it if I want to, but what I'm going to do now is actually just rinse my paintbrush, and then I'm going to drag that colour down. Okay. And you can put the water brush back in there, just lifting off that water, and go a little bit stronger at the top if I want to. Again, not trying to work the surface too much with the watercolour. Watercolour is a material which likes to find its own path, and sometimes the happy mistakes that are made from it, the beautiful qualities, is leaving the watercolour to do its own thing. If you're pushing the watercolour too much, it just looks too manufactured and just hasn't got that beautiful quality that you want. So that's the first one that I want you to have a go at doing. Just using one colour, and then by adding water as you go down, you get a nice translucent colour on there, letting the paper come through the surface. Let's move on to the second one. This one, which is different to that, is actually put water down first. I've cleaned my water. I've actually got 2 pots of water just to help the paint stay fresh and clean. So I'm putting water on the surface there, just in the box. And we're going to use the same colour. Just go back with the blue and just place it on there. And what you can see now is that the paint diffuses into the water a lot easier. So if you want to create a very smooth transition from one colour to another one, that water really does help. I'm just going to go for a yellow. Just at the bottom there. Again, just letting that water do the job for you. Okay, I'm hardly blending the colour on there. And what you'll see at the stage here, when watercolour is wet, it looks completely different to when it's dry. And people who are only starting off on watercolour will think to themselves, well, that's not blended as much as it could do. Over time, when it dries, you'll see that it'll keep on infusing and blending on its own. So the key thing with watercolour is don't overwork it, just leave it be and then come back to when it's dry. For the third one, what I've done, I've just put a flat single colour of green down, and this is going to be a layered one. So we've done a very thin layer, and then we're going to put a fat layer over the top of it. But one thing that you do need to do is just make sure it's fully dry before placing any colour over the top of it. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to dry it with a hairdryer and then move on to the next stage. Okay, so my base layer is now dry, and I don't know if you can see this one also, but the colour is a lot smoother than it was when it was wet, and that's purely just leaving it and let the watercolour doing its job on its own. Messed up a little bit there, but oh well, these are only testers. So for this one, what I'm going to do now, just pick up a smaller brush, and this is a chance for you to maybe make some marks. Now, depending what you're doing it of, it could be patterns on crockery, it could well be leaves on trees or bushes. It's entirely up to you what mark making you do, but I'm going to go for a dark colour over the top, and you can do that a number of ways really. You can either add an opposite colour to the colour that you've used on the base layer to get a darker colour, or just choose maybe a blue or a purple. I'm just going to add a little bit of red into my green. So if you don't know, using the opposite colour on the colour wheel will just bring down that colour. So this turns to almost like an olive green. And I'm just going to play around just doing some lines and some dots and things like that. What you can see is that we have that nice colour underneath, and we're just starting to layer up that surface. So just playing around with different colours. In fact, you could have a go at doing a variety of different tones. Mixing other colours. I'm just going to go with the blue now, see what happens. And we'll just see what the effect is like once it's dried. On to the fourth one. So I've moved on to the fourth one now, and as you can see, I've done half of the rectangle with a base layer of colour. This one's just a yellow ochre. It would be best if you could use a light colour for this, and I'll show you the reason why. This one, we're going to be using masking fluid. If you don't know what masking fluid is, it's actually like a latex material. It's very smelly, but also if you are allergic to latex, please make sure that you do wear some gloves. If you want the cheap alternative, I mean, this is the Daler and Rowney version of Copydex, which is around about £10 for a bottle. You can actually use Copydex, which is actually used for a glue for carpets, but it works just as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to put this masking fluid on the surface. Try it just on the white first of all, and then we're going to put it over the yellow, and then we're going to put a base layer of colour over the top of the two surfaces. And what you're going to see is that it's going to protect whatever's underneath it. So that's what I'm going to do now, just in a quick time lapse, and then I'm going to show you what the effect is afterwards. So I've got the Copydex and I've placed it onto the surface. I've just hair dried it. Sometimes if you can leave it to dry naturally if you want to, but for the speed of this I wanted to just use the hairdryer. And what you should see is that the masking fluid actually turns transparent, so you kind of know that, and you can feel it anyway. It starts to look like a rubbery surface. One thing that you just should make sure is that if you're using a paintbrush to apply this, that kind of the paintbrush is obsolete once you've used it. It actually ruins it. So I've just used the other side of the paintbrush just to dip it in with there, but you could use a kebab skewer, or maybe if you have got a selection of old brushes, then you could use that too. What I'm going to do now is just with a light wash of colour, I'm going to just choose a blue for this one. I'm just going to go over the whole surface. And what you can see now is where the masking fluid was, it's just repelling it. And then I would leave this to dry just for a couple of minutes, or you could use another hairdryer session on it, which I'll do now. So that's all dry now, and this is one of my favourite techniques. So what you can do after it's all dried, you think to yourself, that's complete. Well, what you're actually going to do now is just use your finger from left to right. Once all this is all dried, and you'll be able to take off that masking fluid. And you're revealed with the colour underneath. So I've seen you there, I'll put the yellow ochre. You can see it's all come through nice and fresh. And then on the white comes through as well. So if you wanted to protect layers over the top, then you could do. In fact, now you've left the white on there, if I was to go and use maybe a lighter colour such as a subtle yellow maybe, then you could actually go over the top of that, and then wherever you had white, you could have a colour as well. So it's thinking about strategically, how would you place colour down first of all to protect it, conceal it, and then layer over the top of it as well. We're going to move on to the fifth one now. The fifth one is a relatively simple technique. All you need is a base of colour, quite a lot of water on it. Place it onto the surface there, as I say, and being very delicate. Try not to go over the surface too many times. You want it to look quite fresh. And then while it's wet, in fact I might put a little bit of water just extra on there. While it's wet, you're going to get some salt over the surface. And again, it's a technique that you won't see until the watercolour is dried. But just like anything with salt, it's going to draw out the moisture of the paint and create a really nice, quite nice pattern involved there. You can see it start happening, but it's going to happen a lot more the more it dries. For the sixth technique, I'm just going to use, again, another wash of colour. This time I used a little bit of blue mixed in with the green, just to get a different hue over there. And this time I'm going to remove colour. So I'm not doing any adding whatsoever. I've got a very damp paintbrush. I'll go back and forth quite a few times, take off the paint. You can actually start getting the white surface back again. And you don't have to just use the paintbrush. You can maybe think about using just some tissue and take any of that pigment off on there. It's a really nice, easy way to get that very subtle colour onto your page. So we're at number 7. This one is going to be of glazing. Glazing is a very sophisticated way of using watercolour, but you'd need to understand it because a lot of people try and create certain colours by combining them together in one go. Sometimes it cannot happen in watercolour. What you'd have to do is put a base layer down, and then once it's dried, lay over a series of colours over the top of it to change the properties of it. It's really, really nice to see. And what I'm going to do for this one, quickly, I'm just going to put a band of some colours, and then we're going to play around with some colours going over the top of it and see what reaction it has. So that's the 7th one completed. I'll show you a bit of a close-up just to see on there, because I don't think you can see the complexity of the colours and how they're laid over the top of the other. But sometimes that takes a bit of time. You lay it over a colour, put the hairdryer on it, and then so forth. and you can layer it as many times as you want to, but what you're going to find is those beautiful layers starting to come through, and every time you put a colour over the top, then it reacts with the colour underneath and changes the property of it. But one of my favourites on that one. The next one is going to be a dry brush technique. So it's exactly what it says on the tin. You're just going to use a dry brush, and you're going to see the effect of when placing the paint over the top of the textured paper, hopefully you should get a really quite a nice textured look to it. So I've got a dry paintbrush just with a little bit of blue on it there. As I say, this is only for testing purposes and just doing some experiments. But I'm just going to play it on the page there, and having that really quite nice texture of the dry brush really is quite nice, especially if this was over the top of maybe some other layers of colour. It really kind of makes a bit of a difference, adding some texture, because sometimes with watercolour it's very plain and sometimes needs a bit of bite to it. So very, very simple, very quick, that technique, but very, it's essential to have in your box of techniques for using watercolour. So we're on to number 9. I'm going to use the same blue, but this time I'm just going to put a little bit more on it and also add some water. And, well, there's no word that's art specific for this one. All it is just doing some splattering on there. Okay, so just flicking the watercolour onto the page. Mine's got a little bit messy there, but quite nice, especially if you just want to be quite expressive with it and not really worry about it too much. So at the end of the day, it's all about having fun with the materials. So that's the 9th one completed. And what you can see actually I've done there, I've added a little bit of red. And what another technique that I've combined with that one, instead of doing it separately, is actually get some drips going on there. And where you saw on the last piece, it was actually by a mistake, where you can see the watercolour when using the hairdryer. This one, I've actually done it on purpose. So you can get that really beautiful quality of experimental lines that are coming away from the piece of work. And especially if you wanted to do maybe some especially portraiture, then this technique looks really, really cool. For the last one, we are just going to be using some wax. Now, I haven't got any wax or oil pastel. I've only got a bit of a candle and literally a tiny bit. So what I'm going to do, first of all this is just to represent is that wax repels water. So if you put wax down in any subtle way, so I'm just going to just play around with that colour on there. Hopefully this works. And then once that's on the surface, choose any colour that you feel like you want to use. I think we are on a blue type of theme today, or green, so I'm just going to stick with that colour palette. And then try and use a little bit of water, because again, that's the water that's going to repel, it won't be the colour yourself. And as you can see there, wherever the wax was, it's repelled, and then wherever it hasn't, it's managed to get and hold onto that surface. So they are the 10 techniques. Hopefully you found them interesting, and let's move on and use them into some form of piece of work. So hopefully you enjoyed doing those techniques. What I'm going to do now is actually create my own piece of work and use some of those techniques and put them into it. But what I really want you to study is how many layers of paint I actually layer over the top one another, just to make sure that I can get the colour as rich as I possibly can. Another thing that you'll notice is that I use hardly any white. I might use a little bit for the final touches, but the reason for that is if I add white within the colour, I'm going to be using it in more of a gouache type of way, which means that the colours are going to be really opaque rather than that beautiful translucent quality that I'm after. watercolour tutorial. Hopefully it was beneficial and you enjoyed it. If you did, please give us a thumbs up. And if you want to see similar videos, then please subscribe to the channel. Until next time, see you later guys, bye.